I'd love it if you could do the twist one more time.
You just wait. All hell's gonna break loose.
I don't want to have a fight right now.
Then stop talking.
I've got some ideas we can kick around, but you're gonna have to tell me your name, sweetheart.
I'm Peggy Olson. I want to smoke some marijuana.
By golly, you're prickly.
I'll cut the cheese.
Well, that's a relief.
Your asses are going to wear off those chairs.
We got it. You're educated.
This is not civilian conversation.
No one thinks you're happy. They think you're foolish.
This episode of Mad Men Men contains disturbing audio related to podcasts in America. One of the hosts is shown in... Welcome to Mad Men Men, the weekly show where we discuss a show that used to come out weekly. Each week we take a close look at an episode of the AMC series Mad Men, which ran from 2007 to 2015. We're changing the conversation of the show all these years later, where one of us is a first-time watcher of the show. One went through it a while back when it was airing. And then there's me, who watches it about once a week. I'm John Negroni, though some just call me a 55 Coxman. And over here, fresh off his 30th birthday, he is Will Ashton, and he is so high.
What up? So I was going to ask you before I forget, that little introduction, the thing that you were reading off that starts the episode, was that on the original, like when it aired on AMC? That's only because... was
BLM, like 2020, I think was when that happened. Okay. Remember when there was like that whole era? It was like a few months when a bunch of corporations were like trying like to be like, you know, sensitive and doing like the black tiles and then a bunch of TV shows changed their episodes. That's what that is. Yeah.
Right. Okay. That's what I thought. Because I just think it's kind of funny, I guess, or ironic that like they on Hulu, I think they like just straight up took episodes off without warning that had any like reference or inclusion of blackface. So like there were like several. That's several.
Like 30 Rock.
Yeah, I was gonna say if there's a 30 Rock episode where John Hamm does blackface, and they just like whoop, that doesn't exist anymore. And then in this episode, you see, Scrubs as well. There are like a few episodes of Scrubs, I think, where they have blackface. I know there's also like a Always Sunny, a couple episodes where they do blackface. So
the D&D episode of Community.
That one I thought was a bit of a stretch, and by bit I mean extremely much.
Totally.
But anyway, we do have a third person. You heard his voice. Mike Overholse. One day you'll look back on this podcast and smile. Just don't get pregnant.
I also have some beef with your intro here today as well, John. Technically, we all watch Mad Men at least once a week, or else we couldn't do this podcast.
You know what it is? It's like I had it written down like I watch it once a year, but I felt like that's underselling it. So it's like once a week.
If it was once a year, you wouldn't be prepping for these episodes. I'd be concerned.
Technically, I watched it 2 to 3 times a week, but not lately because we took a break. But anyway.
No one can trust you, John. You've lied like 4 times in the last 30 seconds. How many times do you watch this damn show?
Who knows? I'm like Will with seasons 1 and 2, I guess. Okay. We're talking about season 3, episode 3. Nice little, connection there. A little mirror. This episode came out August 30th, 2009, 14 years ago almost. Written by Davi Waller and Matthew Weiner. Directed by Jennifer Getzinger. It's called My Old Kentucky Home. And Davi Waller, one of the co-writers, I don't think this person, I'm not sure gender-wise who this person is, a woman. Okay. So Davi Waller, I don't think has done any other episode. This might be her first one. I'm just like kind of quickly running through it. And yeah, I do not see her name anywhere else. But Matthew Weiner, I think he has written an episode of Mad Men before. And then Jennifer Getzinger, that name is pretty familiar. Yeah, she directed The New Girl last season, and she might have also done the first season. No, she didn't. Okay. So this is, I guess, her second episode. Now, in terms of ratings, this one was a bit of a dip from the last 2. So we talked about how the first episode of season 3, big ratings, 2.76, highest in the show's history up until that point, I believe. And then it dipped down after that expectedly to 1.9. This one dipped down to 1.61. Yeah, so, a bit of a modest decline, but we'll keep tracking that as the season goes forward. In terms of what this episode is doing, I mean, this is an interesting one. This is one of those episodes where you're kind of like, Matt, you're starting to feel the Mad Men tone a little bit more. It's especially like how different it is from season 1. For sure. Like, look at this episode and look at an episode from season 1, and you can kind of tell like how far the writers have taken this concept. So I got to go to you, Will. First timer. What was your reaction to to this beautiful little episode of television?
I mean, I think I told you this already off the air, but I was planning to watch this episode at work. Like I had some downtime between the shows. I was going to just squeeze in a little bit of Mad Men, and that title card
watch
came
it with
up.
my black coworkers,
Right?
And
that title card came up, and I was like, I guess I'll have to watch this one at home. But so I mean, if you have a title card like that, that the episode's going to be a little spicy. Like it's not like though I do agree that I do remember there is like that era, I guess, as you called it, where corporations and streamers were just like putting those titles before not only racially insensitive episodes, but like just episodes that could potentially offend somebody. Like I saw someone on Letterboxd note that on Disney Plus, there's like a title card before Mr. Magoo that says this is not an accurate depiction of blind people. And it's like, oh, okay, that's good to know. I was going into Mr. Magoo thinking this is how blind people are.
To be fair, look, 2020 was a weird time.
Yeah.
And we don't have to relitigate what happened. I don't think any of us are ready. Sure. But I should probably read the title card so people have a little bit more context if they watched this episode a long time ago and they didn't see it. This is the first time I had seen it, quite personally.
But you said you watch this show every week.
Yeah. And then Mike said that I lie 4 times. Yeah, because I haven't rewatched the show since I think right before 2020. So there you go. Because that's when we started talking about doing this, because I wanted to rewatch it. And we've been doing it very slowly. Anyway, so this is what the title card says. This episode contains disturbing images related to race in America. One of the characters is shown in blackface as part of an episode that shows how commonplace racism was in America in 1963. Which, by the way, my reaction to that was, in 1963. Yeah. It was commonplace back then. Anyway, in its reliance on historical authenticity, the series producers are committed to exposing the injustices and inequities within our society that continue to this day, so we can examine even the most painful parts of our history in order to reflect on who we are today and who we want to become. We are therefore presenting the original episode in its entirety. I pretty much agree with this completely. I mean, I think that there is value to show that, like, yeah, in 2009, this was not something like you go to like the reviews of this episode online. Very, very few, like they mention the blackface, but it was such a sort of like, oh yeah, we're a post, like that was in the past. It's okay to sort of like show this stuff. Obviously, that kind of has changed in years when like people are like, you know what, this is not a game, and we're pretty far away.
Are you implying that people, like critics at the time, were like, we're in Obama's America, therefore we don't have to mention blackface?
Yes. Well, people blame it on like the Obama's America thing. I think it's more of a West Wing syndrome, quite honestly. Okay. You know, I think it's like, look, you and I, we didn't really like come about in that time as fully. We were still we were young, you know, we were teenagers basically. And Mike, I mean, he was rocking that cradle. But no, I think this is the right message to say. It's like, we're going to show the original episode. This is what the episode was. You know, here's your warning. Like, you know, this isn't that, if that's something. But I think that that's the right sentiment, you know?
I think there's also a lot to be said about how they did use it in the episode. And I think it was for like a very specific characterization and storytelling. It didn't feel, you know, egregious in any way. If anything, even how they just like hard cut to it and like you're not expecting it, and all of a sudden you're on this close up of Roger's face in this blackface. I actually think it's a pretty powerful scene.
Yeah, the main character is uncomfortable, although like you could read that a few different ways. Of like, is he really uncomfortable about the racism? No, he just thinks that, because as we find out at the end of the episode, he just thinks Roger's making a fool of himself. And I think the clear tell to me is like watching Carla's interactions with Grandpa Gene and showing the contrast between, you know, her place in the household, not even being able to sit at the table, having to deal with this grumpy old racist man, versus, you know, this derby day that's like, look how nostalgic we are about the 20s. It's a meta, you know, it's like they're looking back on the 20s, 40 years in the past. And then we're kind of doing the same thing, the showrunners looking back in the 1960s. And, you know, there's a certain type of person who watches Mad Men and kind of relishes in the bad stuff almost. And it's sort of the people who make the show being like, yeah, you're dumb. because there's not much, there's a lot of context that you leave out when you wistfully look back in the 50s and 60s without really criticizing the time for, how it wasn't so great for everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have seen like those kind of title cards before, like different things like Looney Tunes and different piece of entertainment in the past. And I think, as much as we were kind of joking about, I do think I much prefer that as opposed to, someone just trying to like yank the episode or edit it, because you can't like edit that scene. It's the reason, like the source of the title of the episode, My Own Kentucky Home. Like it's like that's where it comes from. And so it would be awkward if they took it out. And also I feel like it's only going to be worse when corporations like Hulu just take episodes wholesale out, because it's like you're not really acknowledging it. You're just trying to like kind of make yourself look better by being like, oh, those don't exist. Like you just thought those episodes were real. They're not there. It's just like,
that's the key, isn't it? It's like you're making yourself feel better or trying to cover your ass instead of like actually make something better for the people that it really affects.
Right. And I mean, as you're saying, like Mad Men is so good about like wrestling with the past and like the sins of our past and culturally, personally, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, I mean, obviously racism still presides today. It's not a thing of the past. It is a thing of the past, but still a thing of today. And yeah, I mean, it may not be exactly in this form, but I mean, it's something that this episode wrestles with, I think, thoughtfully. It's not, just done in haste.
It's almost like this episode, or Mad Men in general, ages really well, because I think they unintentionally or accidentally like had this commentary on like what polite society is really like, right? And like we've seen it over and over again over the seasons, but this is very similar to how racism and systemic racism and stuff operates in like our current society. I mean, you have people who are just like monstrous racists, but they're people like Roger who you like. You hang out with at an office, and you've seen him be very sexist. You've seen him be a terrible person, but you've also seen that people really like him, that people get along with him. And Mad Men is kind of about like how monstrous people are everywhere. And, it's not like, the world is not so black and white. The way that I think media, like when we were growing up, it was very, very preachy, it was very like, movies and TV shows about like racism and stuff like that. It was very on the nose. It was very like, this person's very bigoted. He has a scowl because he doesn't want, the white people and the black people to hang out, or this person is, you're racist if you say bad things. And it doesn't really examine like, like there's racism in a lot of like places where you wouldn't expect it if you ingested that kind of diet, that's kind of getting into like the West Wing syndrome of like racism is this big hairy beast that used to exist, and sometimes it exists in these people over here, but most people aren't like that. And instead, I think like we've all kind of as millennial people, we've kind of seen that be turned on its head quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I will say in regards to that scene, normally I am team Trudy. I like Trudy a lot. I feel bad for her. And I think she's a great dancer in this episode, but she was enjoying Roger's song and dance too much for me. I was just like, Trudy, you're going to have to take an L on this one. This is not good. This is not a good look for you.
Well, she belonged to a club like that, so that's nothing new for her.
I like one thing I caught in this episode that I hadn't really noticed before is the difference. This episode is all about contrast, right? So there's such a contrast between Pete and Trudy and Harry and Harry and Jennifer. Whereas like they didn't grow up in this lifestyle. They are like, they didn't grow up in a club. Trudy says like, oh, I went to a club like this. Trudy gets along with Betty, who's kind of in a similar thing. They come from money. So they know the proper etiquette. They know how to like build everything up. And you see that through this episode. Like they're so comfortable. That the swing dancing thing is like a very direct sort of like you see Harry and Jennifer get pushed out of the dance floor. And I love it because it's also the show saying that like, yeah, where there's racism, but also classism, it's almost like this subtle commentary on like how people of like, people can be marginalized based on their wealth, their class, their status, as well as their race, and how that all sort of like intercedes. It's really smart storytelling because it does it without sort of like, looking at the camera and being like, hello, John Hamm here. It's time to talk about this episode.
I wouldn't even say it's that subtle in this episode, right? Because beyond just that contrast of who is at the Derby Day is, you have the creatives being forced by the people at the party to stay over the weekend and work. And what are they doing?
Exactly.
Smoking pot, which is a very like working class like type drug and like activity to do, right?
That's probably like why the secretary is sort of like so taken aback, you know, and then is so disapproving, because she's like, you're not thinking about your future, you know, but she's not thinking clearly about like Peggy has to tell her, hi, no less, like, I have an office, like I have a secretary. What's up, girl? Like, what you talking about? I'm good.
Yeah, I mean, Peggy's reaction, I guess, to weed is pretty fascinating to me in the sense that, like, I don't know. I mean, you know, I'm not going to divulge my history with marijuana, but I feel like
it's legal in Pennsylvania, isn't it?
Medically, it is. But I would say that Peggy is maybe the most clear-headed high person I've ever seen. 9/11 or 911.
So Mike held up his phone and said 911. The joke obviously being that he's going to call the cops on Will.
Right.
And Will immediately interpreted that as 9/11. Brilliant. Beautiful.
Nah, man.
You can't script something like that.
AI will never be able to recreate this.
I know.
Wow, you can't legally possess marijuana in Pennsylvania as it's still considered illegal under state law. That surprises me. I feel like because there's, I think, half the country now, almost, it's legal.
Well, I mean, maybe by the time this episode comes out, it'll be legal in the state of Pennsylvania.
I would hope so. You know, what is Don Draper able to smoke? He's from Pennsylvania by way of Illinois.
Exactly. But I was gonna say about Don, since you kind of teed it up, I appreciate, as we were talking about with the classism, that Dawn and Jane are kind of in a similar position in this episode, in the sense that like they're both seemingly kind of if I can recall correctly, kind of like working class people, or at least people that didn't grow up in this lifestyle, and that they're kind of putting on like a costume by being here. With Jane, it's a lot more.
Jane is Jewish, so she kind of comes from. Some call her Mary Jane. Peggy calls her that.
Yeah.
And Paul.
But I was just saying that. But like Jane has like these big kind of outrageous outfits in this episode. Like she's taking the role of being Roger's wife, like as if it's like almost kind of performative. Like she's like,
well, she's trying to be Jackie O, right. You know, because Roger wants to see himself as a young JFK. There's a nice thing going on there. It kind of reminds me, this is more current events thing, but very, very recently, the Florida governor, his wife did a very, very similar thing where she like dressed up as Jackie O, Jackie Kennedy. Jackie O would come later. Jackie Kennedy in like the, you know, sort of the Audrey Hepburn-esque sort of like get up 1960s with like these big elaborate gloves, and everyone's just like, are you cosplaying? Like, what are you, it's 2023, not 1963.
But yeah, I mean, I think the contrast between Don and Jane here, since like Don just, he's playing the role as best he can until the end. But he's still deeply uncomfortable with this. Like he just sees this as kind of a garish spectacle and all that, which it pretty much is. And then Jane is just trying to indoctor herself into it as much as possible. Also like to her detriment, in the sense that like she's not allowing herself to eat. She's kind of just like not really looking out for her best interest. She just wants to be the perfect housewife, act like she belongs here, feels like she's always been a part of this club, and quite literally in this case. And I just think that's an interesting comparison point.
Yeah, Jane is just like, you don't like me, like she's, and Roger's literally like, get her a glass of milk like she's a child, right? And she is, she's only 21. Because last season she says like, I'm 20 years old. She is still quite young. Mike, we didn't really get a read on, you didn't get a chance to really say what you thought of this episode kind of overall.
I enjoy this episode. I think the contrasts between Roger and Don are extremely interesting. I think seeing the continued comparison of the levels of respect of all the employees there is really interesting. You get that line of like, we all started here at the same time. And yet we can see the trajectories of the different careers in the eyes of Don too. And then also that scene with Carla and I can't think of the grandpa's name. Grandpa Gene? Yeah.
Grandpa Gene. Give him a little kiss on the cheek goodnight.
At how tense that scene at the dinner table was. Like I was ready for him to smack the shit out of Kiernan Shipka.
Yeah, she was scared, and she had every right to be.
I mean, obviously what Roger did is worse than what Sally did. I'm going to preface that from the beginning. but I got a warning at the beginning from a title card about what Roger was going to do. I didn't get a warning about what Sally was going to do, so I was more taken aback when I saw Sally stole those $5. I was like, what the fuck are you doing, Sally? I trusted you.
Sally Sticky Fingers.
I mean, she was smoking cigarettes last season.
I know.
This one,
but that
she's
made her
picking
cool.
Pockets. Yeah, stealing from her grandpa ain't cool.
Yeah, that ain't cool. That's an old man. You didn't earn those
from your
dollars.
dementia grandpa isn't cool.
Right.
But hey, maybe you could overread it and be like, oh, it's, the youth kind of stealing from the old. I mean, look, she's a baby boomer. She's getting her practice in early in terms of robbing another generation.
I was ready for her to pin it on Carla too. Also a baby boomer move.
Yeah, there's this whole implication that like neither of them is really directly addressing like him being accusing her of taking the money and her having to deal with that, because it definitely, you get the sense that both people have gone through this. They know how this works, what'll happen when the accusation comes through. He even calls her Viola at one point, and then she's like, "We don't all know each other, Mr. Hofstad." Like it hits.
Well, I mean, because it's still so modern too, right? If you are a person in modern day who has a housekeeper and something goes missing, right? It's the first thing you're doing and accusing them of. So again, I think Mad Men being timeless on accident and also sometimes on purpose, that makes the show so good.
Couldn't have said it any better. I did want to mention, we get some setup stuff in this episode, a lot of setup stuff, like the patio ad is still in progress. That whole thing where they're looking for the Anne Margaret person and Harry's just kind of like staring, like, man, Harry sucks. Like, Will, are you on team anti-Harry yet? Are you there?
I will say this episode I felt a little bad for Harry just because he wasn't able to dance. He remembered how many kids Dawn has.
Wait, why is that?
Now, yeah, boo. Now because of that, I'm gonna have to. When the Roger scene came on, Will started texting me. He's like, "Damn, dude, finally, this is what I wanted to see."
I'm right there with Harry, smiling and laughing and clapping.
Wait, was Harry enjoying it? I thought I was just so
caught up. They all were. I think Pete especially was. And you can read that as definitely as like he's been to stuff like this and like he's probably, used to it and enjoys it a bit,
I was just so caught up in Trudy enjoying as much she did that I was kind of just
broke your heart.
Yeah, it broke my heart a bit. So I didn't even pay attention to as much who else was enjoying it other than knowing that Dawn didn't.
And it's interesting because like Dawn is usually somebody who he uses the past. He uses nostalgia to sell advertising. His discomfort in this scene very much, I think, speaks to how to him, this is like, so like, he's just so out of place. He just does not fit in here. It's interesting. There's that moment where, the guy who works in the governor's office comes in and he's like, really like laying it on thick with Betty. But you can tell like he's so at ease. He's so comfortable in this environment. Like he's able to be inside the club in that moment with Betty in a way that like Don isn't. He's in the club, like he's in the bar. He's in the service area. There's a reason he has that conversation with that old man about like, we both kind of like have this background of like, I pissed in the trunk of these people's cars, which I love so much. One of my favorite Don talking about his backstory moments in the show. But is there anything you read out of that, Will? Because there's definitely a lot of like new characters flowing in here. Would you feel like kind of like maybe we're setting up stuff that's going to happen, or yeah?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about like where we were at this point in season 2, like we were kind of getting a lot of the like Jimmy Barrett stuff, and like I think this season's a little bit better, a little bit more graceful about incorporating what I presume is going to be set to follow in the episodes to come. But yeah, I mean, I you guys know about that more than me, so I'm not going to say anything that will get me in trouble later.
Yeah, so I was going to say, ask me that question, John. Come on, go ahead.
No, I'm not going to do anything. We haven't talked about Joan and Greg, which. The thing I love the most about this, like Greg is a surgery guy, right? And the first the first thing we see him do, it's like, you're a guy who does surgery. And the first thing we see him do is he yank an outlet, the plug of the vacuum from the outlet. And Joan is like, you're going to break that. And he's just like, I'll just get a new one. It's like, oh, so then later when they're like, maybe he's been struggling a little bit.
Also, very specifically, he says, I'll get one of my little screwdrivers and fix it. How the hell are you going to fix a plug with a screwdriver? Like, dude's detached.
Yeah, we get the reveal, or it's more confirmation. I think a lot of us kind of can assume that the apartment they're in belonged to Joan, because it does look like the one that she was in the first season. But yeah, in this episode, it's confirmed that like they moved into her apartment in the city, and you start to see sort of the unraveling of like the story that she's been telling, and she's been getting told by this guy who's been telling her like, I'm going to be chief of surgery. Things are going great. But then we find out he doesn't talk to her about this stuff. So there's even more sort of like class warfare, classism going on in that interaction that they're having at the table, where he's a little bit, like he and Joan are certainly like a different sort of like class, right, than those other two couples. And so like it's kind of carrying through, and like Joan is kind of seeing herself as like, man, I thought I was like marrying into this situation where I wouldn't have to worry about money. And it hits even harder when you rewatch the episode. You see like that first interaction with her and Jane, because Jane's the one who ended up with Roger, and she's living that life that Joan wanted, right, with Greg or Roger, you know what I mean? It makes that interaction with her and Peggy a few episodes ago in season 2, when she's trying to talk about like, oh, we're gonna get married at Christmas, and he's a doctor, he helps patch up kids, and it's tragic, it's sad.
And then she does her Weird Al cosplay, and it's even weirder.
I love that. Oh man, she has such a good voice. She kicks it.
Is that her real voice, or is that someone else that they got to like dub in?
I would assume that was Christina Hendricks, because I think she has like a musical background. Okay. Unfortunately, I couldn't get my hands on the commentary, which probably would have like revealed some of this stuff. I do apologize.
Sure.
Hard to get some of the commentary for season 3, but we're working on it. That said, in regards to Joan, like when she does that whole thing, she's performing, entertaining. Again, she's being relegated to like the help. You know what I mean? Like the person on stage instead of the host. Like there's even that thing where like Greg is telling her like, no, I don't sit at the head of the table. She's like, this is your house. And like she's trying to like push them to like that respectability, that sort of thing. And he is just like stuck, in this like subservient mode to like the higher ups. It's all expertly written.
Besides the money thing as well, I think that's one of the things she really adored about Roger was like the power he wielded. And the more it's revealed that Greg, I always mess up anybody like the doctor's names, but just how much of a backbone he lacks. And then she's finding out clearly like he couldn't even surgically give himself a backbone. He's that bad of a doctor.
And it's especially weird too, because it's like not weird, but it's really off-putting. The fact that like you're seeing them, we're like an episode or 2 removed from him raping her, and we're watching like them be in this situation. I mean, it's a good commentary on how like abuse and relationships work, because like this is the kind of thing that happens, right? Where something like that will happen, and then it's not talked about, it's not addressed, it's not fixed, or the right consequences and punishments don't happen for the perpetrator. They just kind of flow into the next stage, and it's a very like it's there, like you can feel it, see it, hear it, but you can't. The characters aren't reckoning with it, and it's hard to watch. All of the scenes with Joan are hard to watch these days. It's kind of sad because she's one of my favorite characters, and I just want her to succeed.
I mean, I'm glad you also brought the head of the table thing, because with Roger, it's just not only is he wealthier, but he's obviously physically and in some respects emotionally more mature than Joan. Yeah, I know, but but compared to most men that Joan has to deal with, like he's a man, and it seems like Joan, in replacing Roger, like she's found out like she's basically married to like someone who isn't quite a man. Like he's just assuming the role of being a man.
You'll recall that when Roger goes to visit the Drapers in season 1, Roger doesn't sit at the head of the table. Yeah. Don does, right?
But no, I mean, I also enjoyed the accordion scene, because when they talk about like what instrument she plays, and like they kind of slowly reveal it's going to be accordion, I'm thinking like, oh, is it going to be like a flute, clarinet, a violin? Like what instrument does Joan play? Can't be a piano unless they're going to like drag it into like the main room. But it was like accordion was the least likely one, I thought. So I was delighted nonetheless. I thought that was a fun scene.
So I looked it up. Christina Hendricks did play the accordion for real and sang. That was her voice. So according to this article on Slash Film, she was already an adept accordion player before Mad Men, so they were able to work it in. The only thing she needed to learn was French for the scene, and so apparently she had a passion for the accordion, and wonderfully so.
We do get a lot of characters singing this episode. Roger, Jane, Joan and
Paul and Fisher. They have like they sing like instead of fighting. I do want to talk more about the Bacardi rum stuff. The cute like how they're doing it. They have to do an advertisement about rum. I mean, no wonder it's hard, but they have to do an advertisement about a Caribbean drink a year away from the Cuban Missile Crisis. And man, I can't even imagine having to thread that line, you know. But I think Will, you already kind of hinted at, or it was either Will or Mike. One of you hinted at how like they're all sort of like reacting differently to being high. She's the one who actually like is able to use it to be creative and like comes up with the ad at the very end. Even when Smitty is trying to get some action on the roof.
Yeah, I mean, I really applaud Peggy for being the most straight-minded high person I've ever seen in my life. Just
her first time.
It was a pretty I know, yeah. But like she was just like so hyper aware. She's like, I'm high right now.
My name is Peggy Olson, and I want to smoke marijuana.
Right.
She didn't even cough. That's the impressive part.
I mean, I have never smoked cigarettes. But if you smoke cigarettes and then you smoke pot, doesn't that sort of like help you be ready for it?
For a joint like that, I guess, yeah.
Because it looked like a pretty small blunt to me, but you know, what are you going to do? The only time I ever coughed was the first time I smoked a cigar because I was definitely not ready. And I was very young, like 10 years old.
Congrats on your first cigar.
Thank you. I haven't smoked like legit pot like that, like from a joint or anything. A lot. Very, very rare. I'm more of an edibles guy. I don't know about you two.
Yeah, can't say that I'm similar in that regard. I definitely, we talk about 2020 being a weird year. I smoked quite a bit of pot. And I'll say I didn't even like it that much. I hate specifically, like I would do a lot of bong rips, and bong rips are just not fun because they're really harsh and they hurt.
Yeah, one of our friends did that once when we were in LA. Like made it in the sink with like just like a thing of water, and like, oh man, that sucked. I hated that so much. I have my edibles right here though. Got some elderberry for indica, you know, and then we're breaking them out. I just got this. It's Space Jam. Oh, there's 911. And look, I live in California. I bought these like at the store. Like, we are good.
I got these from Safeway.
No, we actually have a really nice distillery where I live. It's like connected to a winery. I took my my parents there, and because my mom, like, she came to visit, and she was just like, "My name is Nancy Negroni, and I want to smoke." No, she legit was like, "Hey, is there a dispensary around here?" And there you go, we got some stuff.
Amazing stuff. It's always great to get your parents to smoke weed with you.
We didn't smoke anything, just ate.
Excuse me. Just get high with you.
Just get high.
I like to think you sat down with your parents, you put on Inside Out, and you're like, hey, I have this crazy idea. What if this movie was connected to all these other Pixar movies? And they're like,
shut the
whoa.
fuck up.
That's the first time they hear about Joan's Pixar theory.
You know what's funny about that? Everybody assumed that I was very high when I came up with that. I legit had never had weed before at that point in my life.
You had never even taken one weed?
No. I had never had a pot. I was literally like, I was like 22 and I just, nah. But everyone's just like, man, I want whatever this guy's smoking. You know what I mean? Anyway, back to the episode.
Well, I mean, you were high. Let's not get this twisted. You were just high on life.
Okay, well, that's nice. We didn't
high on a bug's life. I'm sorry, I had to.
Jesus Christ.
That was good, Mike. I applaud you for that one. That was good.
But yeah, no, bringing the class warfare thing even further, we also have Paul. Paul gets a little bit more fleshing out, right? Like he and Smitty have this whole thing where he's like, oh yeah, I smoke weed whenever I can, you know, whatever. And he calls up that guy, and that guy kind of like outs him, right? As, you know, he's from New Jersey. He was on a scholarship. He's you know, he's not the country club guy, right? And he presents Paul, you know, as sort of like he's a very conflicted guy, because at one point he presents himself as bohemian. You know, he had that party last season, you know, him dating a black woman, and obviously trying to like appear very progressive and interesting, you know, as Joan kind of called him out. And then in this episode, you know, he also though tries to like fit into that sort of like that mold. Like when he was at Princeton, he wanted to fit into that kind of like, you know, King of the Tiger tones, you know, and I bet he was quite a great singer. I'm on Paul's side in that that little argument where they're like, oh, they kicked you out because you were flat or whatever. And who knows the truth?
I did think the best piece of acting we got in this episode was Peggy's immediate reaction to his singing, because she plays it well of like being impressed and genuine, but also high in her applaud. It's just like a really small moment, but it's one of them. It stayed with me.
I thought about like, I wonder how Will's going to react when Paul all of a sudden on cue is just like, hello, my baby. Hello, my darling.
I love the W beef toad. Oh, the frog is awesome.
Wait, was that your impression of me?
I think that's just my impression of anybody who really likes that frog dance.
Oh yeah, what that frog's name from Looney Tunes?
I thought he was just like the Warner Brothers frog. I don't know.
Frog from Michael J. Frog.
Get the fuck out. Is that really his name?
Yeah.
Michigan
have you never
J.
seen
Frog. Sorry, Michigan.
Have you not seen the short with where that came from? That's like an actual Looney Tunes short. I mean, that before like it was.
No, definitely, I have.
Yeah. Okay.
We watch Saturday morning cartoons. But on that note, I did think. Oh no, go ahead, Mike. You first.
I don't know if you're leaving off Paul, and I did want to mention something about Paul, just specifically.
I was going to mention something about Paul, but for you first, please.
Okay. Well, we're talking about Madman being timeless, and I think Paul is the closest thing we get to modern day virtue signaling. Which is Paul's whole shtick, right?
Yes.
We already talked about him dating black women and going and traveling south with her, but he also just changes no matter what crowd he's in to virtue signal something different, right? And it's so different than like what Dawn is doing, pretending to be somebody else and fit in where he doesn't belong. It's like it feels just complete like a different mechanism almost.
I think it's more like Don's just better at it. And especially when you consider that like Don's not that much older than Paul and Pete and them. He, like 10 years, if that, maybe fewer, maybe more like 8.
Wise enough to tell Pete not to give out his business card.
Yeah. I love the little bromance those two have going on. They're making a go of it, those two. But no, I was going to mention real quick about Paul, unless you had something else about Paul, Will.
I was just going to say, I mean, I think that also applies to sort of classism that Mike was talking about earlier, where even though like Paul and who was the drug dealer? Fisher, even though they grew up together, like went to school together and stuff, like he kind of looks down on him and sees him as like lesser, and he like kind of demotes him to being like, like
you're a drug pusher.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and Paul is sort of just like at that first brush, right? Paul is sort of like, Fisher tells him like, you never call, all this stuff. And then you see later on why, because like Paul and him don't really get like they're from totally different worlds. And like clearly like there must have been some kind of rift between them based on like Fisher looking down on Paul, or maybe it was something else along those lines. I was going to say that's a decent enough segue. Paul's singing voice is fine. It's like one of those things where he starts singing and you're just like, okay, he can carry a tune. But then you hear Fisher sing and you're like, oh, now we're talking about a real Tiger tones, because he was way more like, like he was making it. And then in that moment, I just had that feeling where I was like, oh, maybe he was kicked out of the Tiger tones. I'm just very invested in the Tiger tones subplot that they just leave, up to our imaginations. But no, I just thought that that's all. That's all I really had about that.
I will say also just a little bit of nightmare fuel of your drug dealer wanting to actually do the drugs with you. That's literally never a good time.
It's like that scene in Boogie Nights.
Exactly.
But like if Alfred Molina was just like, let's sing a song.
Will, what do you make of the? I know you don't approve of what our little Karen Shipka, little Sally Draper, what she did in this episode. What do you think's going on there? Because when we've seen her act out before, it's been a clear reaction to something, right? What do you think this was? Kids being kids?
Well, it's interesting that she always kind of wants to be like an adult. Like she's obviously more mature than Bobby. She feels like, not like able to really understand her parents, especially her dad. Like every time she kind of tries to like foster a relationship with either parent, like her mom's always like, watch TV, and like her dad's just like, go to bed and stuff like that. So
yeah, but then Grandpa Gene treats her like an adult.
Right.
He like is like, read this Roman book about the Roman Empire.
Read me this 900-page book about the decline of the Roman Empire.
Pronounce licentiousness.
Right. And I was going to ask, I mean, did they release the audiobook with Kieran Shipka reading that?
Yeah, at that age.
Yeah.
She's a good reader too for her age. I mean, she's 9 years old in the show. Mm-hmm. She's she's reading at a pretty decent level right there. I mean, she's like what, third, fourth grade or something. If when you're 9, I think that's like third or fourth. It kind of depends, I guess.
Yeah, but I mean, I think there's like some attention that I think she's trying to, like, I don't know. There's a sense that like she can form some sort of bond with her grandfather, but I feel like she still feels kind of neglected, and she's unable to really, I don't know, feel connected in a meaningful way outside of these kind of brief, before
she's
bed.
Like, this guy should pay me. I gotta hang out with him all the time.
Are you saying? Yeah, I'm saying all these $10 words. The least I get is a $5 bill.
There you go.
I admit I butchered the $10 word, so I'll just take 5 of your dollars, Grandpa.
I mean, maybe the hint is when Don is trying to just give the money to Gene when Gene's looking for it, and he's like, it's not about the money. So like, I think maybe that's our hint of like Sally's not doing it about the money. Maybe it is what Will is claiming here, that it's like her trying to reach for being an adult. She just sees an opportunity. It's not personal. She's probably just thinking to herself, like, this old man, he's in this room all day. What are you going to do? Like, he doesn't need this. I'll take a little bit. He loves me. Like, I'll get away with it, right? But then, of course, she feels guilty because she's a human being. I don't know. That could be it. What do you think, Mike?
I mean, I definitely think it's stemming from the baby, right? It's not getting the attention from her mom. Everything's going to be about the baby. She's not going to have the attention anymore. So she's. I think you're right. It's only in direct response to acting out about something, and I think that's it.
None of us are firstborns. We can't relate with Sally, right?
Wait, I'm a firstborn. What are you talking about?
I always forget. I always think that your sister is older than you. The one who just got married.
Trish?
Yeah.
No, she's she's thirdborn. She's a middle child.
Is Nate the secondborn?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, Will. Your family constellation makes no sense to me.
Shout out to Jess and Emily, since they didn't get mentioned. So let's name all my siblings.
There you go. Yeah.
All right. So far we've named John's parents, your siblings. Like, do I need to bring up my cousins? What's up, Jason and Leslie?
I was gonna say with you, Will. You've had literally, I think, like 2 of your sisters, Emily and Trish, have been on the Cinemaholics, haven't they? Trish was on. Oh no, Emily was on for A&A Ogre.
Right, that's right. Yeah, Emily was on A&A Ogre. Nate was also on A&A Ogre. Trish was on Cinemaholics.
Trish was the first Cinemaholics. Yeah. So she broke the glass ceiling.
Right. And Nate was very upset about that. Yeah, Nate was upset about that because Nate's the only sibling that actually listens to the show. So we'll have to get Nate on at some point.
Well, do you ever take him do you ever go to the movies together or like go to
Sometimes,
screenings together?
Yeah, we've gone to a few screenings together.
There's a recipe for success there.
Sure, yeah.
I would never have any of my siblings on.
Why not? I want Tyrone on the show. I want your dad. I want Tyrone on to talk about like the new Clint Eastwood movie or something.
If there was anybody that I would have on the show, it would be my mom, because she's the one who sort of cultivated me into a film person.
Yeah, she's the one that made you a cinemaholic.
Yeah, the one who made me watch Deep Blue Sea in the theater when I was 9. No, I was 8.
You saw Michael Rappaport fighting a shark, and you're like, the movies are for me.
The first time I saw, I think, Samuel L. Jackson on the big screen, it wasn't Pulp Fiction. That would have been even worse.
Mm.
Will, we should mention, I don't know if you know this, but Mike's going to go to his first press screening.
Oh, yeah?
Next week.
What's the screening?
What is it? Can't even tell you that, man.
Yeah, you
Sorry,
can.
It's super. I'm going to see The Blackening.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I think I have a screening invite on Tuesday. I'm not sure if I'm able to go, but I'm definitely curious about that one. I heard it's good. It's
the beginning of an era. Mike's first. He got his first screener. He had his first screener. Now he's going to his first screening. Next thing you know, he's gonna have a syndicated talk show in Chicago.
I'm thinking about starting my own website, something along the lines of being in between the drafts of your drafts. Mm-hmm. It's like in the notes in between the drafts, I think is the name of it.
In the notes in between the drafts.biz.
Drafts
I love it.
In between.
There you go.
John Negroni is my editor.com.
I'm spinning around because I don't have anything else to get into. So I could get into trivia unless either of you had anything else you wanted to throw at the wall here.
I really would like to talk about just the overall comparison of Roger and Don in this episode, because I think you get a lot of obviously Don isn't approving. He calls him a fool. And then you even get that callback to season 1, right? Where we have to remember Roger made multiple passes at Betty. Mm-hmm. And then you get this whole thing with drunk Jane, and he's stopped. What's going on here? But the ending scene after all this happens, and he looks at them and he sees oh, maybe Roger might genuinely love her. Like, this could be this is what happens when you leave the marriage you're in and you're not happy in, and maybe you can actually find something you're proud of, and then causes him to go find Betty and make out with her, right? But is that genuine? Is that him trying to find love? I just think there's a lot you can interpret from that scene, and I think it's kind of like the crux of where I feel this season going.
I think my interpretation was like, it's almost like the scene is built for him. I think what he's doing is he's trying to recreate the moment that he saw in season 1, episode 3, I think it was, Marriage of Figaro. One of my favorite episodes of that season, when you remember he has the camera and he stumbles upon the couple that are just tenderly kissing each other when nobody else is watching. And I think in that moment, he's feeling insecure because Jane has just outed or called him out about like, I knew you two would get back together. And I think that strikes at him because he knows how like tenuous his marriage is. And he knows that Betty has like kind of gone off to basically, steam about it. And so I think he is doing what he does best in terms of like, not that it's a good thing necessarily, but he is taking something he's observed and he's trying to apply it to his life. It's the whole shtick of the Don Draper character. And I think that's where that's coming from. And I think it's something that genuinely like Betty probably enjoys because like you said, it starts, it was only a kiss. It was only a kiss. They just they start macking. Right. But no, I do think that is like, it's him sort of reacting to Roger sort of challenging him. Right. And it's interesting. You said earlier that there's such a contrast between the two characters. Even at this point, I see so much similarity more than anything else between them. And it's something that I think they also kind of know deep down they're not that different, but it's so uncomfortable because they're from totally different backgrounds. Roger, silver spoon in his mouth, last name literally means silver. Don, came from nothing. Roger's not fully aware of that, but I think Roger knows. Like, he's just kind of like, yeah, he kind of gets that. In fact, I bring up that scene where he does the pass at Don, I think it was, and he sort of says like, oh, maybe you're from there. I forget what that location was, but I wonder if it was either Pennsylvania or Illinois. And I wonder if that's another sort of like draw that they're doing from earlier seasons. I'd have to look into that, but yeah.
We didn't even really talk about Betty kind of having a potential fling. Maybe that's something that's being set up for a future episode. Yeah, I mean, we just didn't really talk about it much. Just that, Betty, I think to me that kind of reminds me of how much she's kind of like Dawn, like when she gets like a social faction like this. Like before, she'd be a little bit more like demure and like, I'm married, whatever. But like now she's kind of like, well, I don't know. I mean, take an interest in me, So
I don't know. I don't think that scene meant anything. I don't think it's going to be a big deal at all.
Okay, I'll take your word for it, Mike.
Who is Rockefeller? Not even a big deal.
I could watch more scenes of Don / John Hamm just making different drinks. I was having fun watching him make that. What was it, like old fashioned?
How many times do you think he had to make that for the? How many shots did they take?
I mean, it looked like they did it mostly in one. So I mean, depending on how many takes they did for that,
it's a lot of muddled bitters.
That was probably like a lot of like iced tea and stuff they use, right? Is that what they use for like liquors and stuff in movies and shows?
Who knows? Movie magic. Only thing I know is that he's smoking herbals.
Yeah.
Let's get into some trivia here. I don't have a ton. There is a moment where Paul quotes the T.S. Eliot poem, The Hollow Men, where he says, this is the way the world ends. This, the full thing is, this is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends, not with a bang, but a whimper. Very famous poem. And I think it's kind of drawing to, there's like a correlation, I think, between that and Grandpa Gene, who is sort of saying it's like, it's all going to go to hell. Just watch, because he's reading that book about the fall of the Roman Empire. So it's kind of interesting foreshadowing, considering that he's saying like everything's going to go to hell and everything. And this is like, it's almost like he's prescient about the JFK stuff, right? Every
time you say Grandpa Gene, just because I just watched Willy Wonka last night, I keep expecting you to say Grandpa Joe.
You really do have so much to struggle with. My Old Kentucky Home, which is the song that Roger sings at the Derby Day, that's the state song of Kentucky. It goes back all the way to 1853, and that's by Stephen Foster. Crazy stuff. And then this is my favorite one. So there's a moment where Paul is using like a paddle to hit a ball into the trash bin in the office. If you look closely, or first of all, he says that it's Harry's paddle. belongs to Harry Crane. And if you look closely, you see that it is Alpha Delta Phi, which is the fraternity that Crane mentioned that he was a member of all the way back in season 1, the episode Shoot, where he and Pete are talking about like the Mamie and all of that stuff. And they come up with the idea to, for the Nixon Kennedy election, like doing all the ads and flooding the markets with laxative shit. Secret laxative. And then also the book that Sally is reading is called The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. I don't think we said that very, clearly or like specifically. And that's all I have.
Did you read that book, John?
I'll read it to you every night so you can go to sleep.
So I was looking it up. So I guess for the show, they don't actually smoke real cigarettes. They smoke herbal cigarettes. Is that what you were talking about, Mike?
Yeah.
But I guess John Hamm smoked 74 of them for the pilot. He was not a fan of that.
Yeah, I can imagine. Oh, there was one more thing. And this is not some trivia I found, but just noticed. So the dance that Trudy and Pete are doing, they're doing the Charleston. I don't know if either of you know how to do the Charleston. I was doing the Charleston just last night, 2 days ago. This is something that I don't know if both of you know this, but I love swing dancing. I used to do swing dancing all the time. I've taught it. It's probably the whitest thing about me.
Is that how you met Melissa?
No, but one of our first dates, I was teaching a class on swing dancing, and I invited her to come out. Nice. And that's where I met one of her best friends.
I'm sorry. Also, did you say that's the whitest thing about you?
Yeah. Is there something that beats it out? I want to hear
John,
it.
you host a Mad Men podcast.
Yeah, that's true.
That is pretty white, but I feel like swing dancing is slightly whiter than that, quite honestly. I feel like if I host a Succession podcast, then we're real.
I mean, if you bring the swing dance class on for an episode of Mad Men, that'd be the whitest thing you could do.
Yeah, I'm at that point. I'm tucking my shirt in. You know what? I know we got to end the episode here, but Succession ended. The series is over. Will's not caught up. He hasn't finished it. But Mike, did you finish it?
He never watched it, I don't think.
I know everything that happened, but I have not watched an episode of Succession.
I keep thinking you watch Succession as much as I do, and that's... Oops.
The other day, I was talking to my friend who really likes Succession. He really loved Andor. And I sent him a text that made him not talk to me for a couple days. And I said, I don't have to watch TV that makes me feel smart.
Interesting.
Just Mad Men.
We got the Rosebud from Mike Overholtz right there.
Well, he did watch Barry. We both have seen all of Barry, which for some reason you haven't watched this season, John.
I'm going to get to it. I'm going to binge
It's so good.
It's going to be great.
It's a riot and a half, man. Just nonstop comedy bits. Speaking of also new season, I Think You Should Leave. Also very good. There's so many better things on right now to watch.
Yeah, what did you think about the new season of I Think You Should Leave, Mike?
Oh, we don't even have enough time. I love it. It's so funny. I think I'll say this one thing. It's very specifically I Think You Should Leave kind of has its own like style to it, and I think by now people expect it. So I think this season he really leans into that, and it's almost like every skit is like a hat on a hat, but it actually works because it's actually a hat on what you're expecting to happen, and I think it's very funny.
I would agree with that in part. I think some of the skits kind of fall into like what's now sort of the formula for I Think You Should Leave. But I think the best ones do what you're saying, where it's like they acknowledge like this is where you think it's going to go and they push it to more extreme lengths. And I think some of the skits this year are among the best that the show's ever produced. Yeah, Driving Crooner is a fantastic one. There have been so many good memes I've been seeing for the Driving Crooner. I saw finally someone did the Furious 7 where it's the Paul Walker and then Tim Robinson. Yeah.
You know what? Sorry, guys, but there are a couple other Mad Men things I forgot to bring up. I'm sorry, but to cut you off on your, you think I should leave, but I won't.
Well, that's why I wanted to end it with that. But sure, yeah, let's keep going.
We didn't bring up Ken, who has that scene where he's just like, oh, I wish I had brought a date while he's watching Pete and Trudy dance. And I hadn't made the connection before. But, obviously I made the connection that Ken and Pete are like competing, right? And so like Pete and Trudy are trying to get attention, but also you could read it as like they're trying to make up for the embarrassment from like being the ones without kids, right? So like there's almost like this little simmering like jealousy and like I'm better than like Trudy thinking she's better than Jennifer, but Jennifer is the one that has a kid. And then they basically like push them off the dance floor. And you see like as that moment is building up, like Trudy is the one who's just like, when are we all going to dance? Like they were clearly like planning this. They practiced, like they had a whole routine set up, and it's a good moment. I do want to stress that one more time before we close this out.
I mean, it's a rare win for Pete, but he also laughed too much at Roger's blackface, so it still is an L for Pete overall.
But is it a win for Pete? Like, because that's the thing. When Roger says the thing about like, oh, you just can't stand that somebody else is happy, blah blah blah, and then what Dawn is saying about Roger applies to Pete possibly. Like, no one thinks you're happy; they think you're foolish. You know, it's the kind of thing you think about somebody who's like, you know, drunk or like. There's a lot you could read into that. Judging other people's relationships and what they're like and what they're doing. You could easily judge Pete and Trudy for being like braggy and annoying.
I was when they like all the different people were like introducing their significant others, and they finally got to Ken. I was hoping, you know, like, this is my wife blank, and here's my wife blank. I was waiting for Ken to be like, Ken Cosgrove accounts.
Right. Yeah. I wonder what it's like for Ken, because he hit on Jane so relentlessly, and he's at this thing like watching her be married to Roger. Like, that's got to be weird. Extremely weird. All right, but that'll do it for us on this week's Men. We'll be back next week for what is the episode after this one? Oh yeah, the arrangements should be an interesting one. But yeah, we'll see you on the next one.
Bye.